I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on. Where you from?
Welcome to Popcorn Sports on the Popcorn Entertainment Network. I'm your host, Mike Kyle, and welcome to yet another episode of Why You Should Root for every team in the NBA for the 2018-2019 season. I, of course, am not alone. I am joined here by Trey Flynn. You can follow him on Twitter at Trey Flynn NBA. He's a site expert for dunkingwithwolves.com, where he covers the Minnesota Timberwolves, which is the team we'll be covering in this episode. Trey, how you doing tonight, man? Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good, yeah, thanks, Mike. My name is Trey Flynn. I am an editor, as you said, for the Dunking with Wolves fan-sided website. I've been doing that for about a year now. I also can be found writing words at SB Nation and fan-sided at large. I live outside D.C., originally from South Florida, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, the first question I have for you, and the question that I ask all of my guests, is how did you begin to cover the Minnesota Timberwolves?
Well, about a year back, I think it was the Jimmy Butler deal that did me in. I'm a fan of the NBA at large. I have a couple of specific teams that I watch a lot. Minnesota was one of them. And the Jimmy Butler deal, when that happened, I decided that I would go all in with writing and try to apply for that editor position, and got it at Fansided, luckily. And I've been writing with them here and there for about a couple of years now, and decided to go full head with it with second job. So that's how I got with the Timberwolves, and ever since then, it's been obviously a rocky road, and as of right now, a roller coaster.
Yes, roller coaster is actually an understatement at this point. But I think that's kind of cool, where I feel like the situation unfolded, and all of a sudden, the Timberwolves were kind of just like this hot team, and because they had so many different pieces with the big three currently of Wiggins, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Jimmy Butler, where it's like, they were really exciting when Jimmy got there, and I feel like you just kind of embraced that opportunity for what that team could ultimately become.
Oh, yeah, man, like when that trade dropped for Chris Dunn, Zach LaVine, and that 7th pick that was going to be Lauri Markkanen for the Chicago Bulls, my jaw dropped. I was like, okay, Minnesota's going for it. They really want to make a move in the West, and I thought it was a really nice move at the time. Still kind of do. We can get into that a little later. But, yeah.
Right. All right. Well, let's kind of shift gears now to the general overview surrounding the Minnesota Timberwolves. They joined the NBA in 1989. They're called the Timberwolves due to a fan contest. However, Minnesota has one of the highest populations of wolves in the area. Their colors are navy, like a volt green, and black. They have 9 playoff appearances, 0 championships, and they play in the Northwest Division with Denver, Portland, OKC, and Utah. Now that we got that out of the way, I want to focus on last season for a little bit. They went 47-35, where they lost in the first round in the Western Conference playoffs, but it was their first playoff appearance since 2004, ending one of the longest streaks in all of professional sports. So for you covering your team, and that last year was your first season with the team, kind of break down what you saw.
Oh, wow. Well, that was a really good introduction, first of all, but it was crazy. I mean, just kind of being in that Minnesota fan base for the first time. I mean, I've been an avid watcher of Minnesota for years, since really Kevin Love was on the team, and even before that, Kevin Garnett. But it was just an emotional roller coaster, as I've stated before, and people were up and down about it, being the first playoff run in about 13 seasons. Fans were just ecstatic, and I think they were really excited to get going. Creating a culture is really important for Minnesota right now. And so that playoff entrance was big. And I think a lot of people leading up to the season before the summer started thought that culture was cemented. And now it feels like it's not. So it was a lot last year. And I think we were leading into a good season this season. But with, the unexpected Jimmy Butler drama, that was just disappointing. So.
Well, first off, I want to say that good introductions are part of my job, so I'm glad I'm very glad I'm doing my job correctly. And then secondly, that's the thing. It's like all of a sudden this Butler trade happens, and as you said earlier, Minnesota, you're like, all right, they're going to go for it. And you saw when Butler played well last year, the team performed well, and this is something that we're going to get into, as we've already referenced a few times. And then when he was off the floor is when they really struggled. He is such a good, dynamic player where he's just the catalyst on any team that he's on.
Yeah, I mean, Butler has that ability to have this almost aura around him where you feel like you need to work harder when he's on the court. And when he's off the court, Minnesota struggled because Tom Thibodeau, the head coach for Minnesota, really likes playing his 9-man rotations. And oftentimes that fifth guy would be really needed off the bench, and we oftentimes did not play that player. And then, our bench was rusty last year. I mean, we had a first-year Timberwolves player in Crawford who was very inefficient off the bench, but we didn't have many other options. So these 2 draft picks we got recently this summer are definitely going to help with him and Nemanja Bjelica leaving to Sacramento. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did the playoff run mean for that team, for that fan base last year? Pretty much. I mean, and the team. You know what I mean, though. But like, just for that organization as a whole, what did that mean?
I think at first, leading into it, especially that first home opener in the playoffs, it was a lot. It was an emotional experience for a lot of the fans, the commentators, the coaching staff. Glenn Taylor himself, who is not often seen at the games being too emotional or being too aware always of what's going on. He was very adamant about being inclusive in that game. So it was definitely a spark in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And, I think a lot of people knew going into that game that Houston was going to be an amazing opponent. So they weren't expecting much, but getting that one win was really important to the fan base. They really thought, like I said before previously, that would create some kind of foundation for a new culture in Minnesota, because they haven't, seen the playoffs since the Kevin Garnett era. And I actually interviewed former number 1 pick Joe Smith, the player who had all that contract debacle in Minnesota, when he was in the playoffs with Kevin Garnett in Minnesota, and kind of compared it to what was happening last year. And he said it was very similar. The crowd was vibrant, and it's what Minnesota needs going forward. But yet again, with this year, it's going to be a tough road if they want to make the Western playoffs again, because not only is the conference incredibly difficult, incredibly hard to make the playoffs, incredibly difficult to get into the playoffs, it might even be harder than last year. So it's definitely going to be a tough job.
Do you think that playoff run made fans want even more to come in the future? Because I live in Cleveland, right? And so when we had LeBron,
mm-hmm.
you're like, that's the thing. It's like when we had LeBron the first time, we're like, all right, cool, we're going to go to the playoffs every year. We have a chance to make the finals. LeBron leaves, we're in the shitter for 4 years. LeBron comes back, and all of a sudden, it's 4 straight finals, and you just want more of it. So do you feel like that's going to be the case now for Minnesota moving forward?
Right. I'll say this. Minnesota fans are pessimistic, but when things are rolling, they can be overly positive to the point where you want to join the fan base, which is a really great quality to have as a fan base. But they're pessimistic due to the playoff drought, which they are definitely allowed to be pessimistic in that situation.
Right.
One of the worst droughts in NBA history. I think the 3rd worst at the time. So, yeah, I mean, when it comes to Cleveland and comparing to Cleveland, I think we're going to be wanting to go to the playoffs, obviously, again, more this year. If we didn't make playoffs last year, we'd probably expect that again this season. But like you just said, we made the playoffs last year. Player morale was up. Fan morale was up. So going into the season, definitely thinking we're going to make the playoffs again, even with the Jimmy Butler drama ensuing.
Right. All right. And with that, let's just segue right now into this year's roster and this year's expectations. So, Jimmy Butler, Carl, I say this all right now with a big smile on my face because I know what we're going to get into and I'm so excited about it. Jimmy Butler, Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, Derrick Rose, Taj Gibson, Jeff Teague, Tyus Jones, Gorgie Jang, Josh Okogie. How do you say his last name? Because I've heard it multiple ways. Okay. So, break down this roster for me, and we're going to get into all of the fun because I've been, like, that's the thing. So, when all this, and we'll elaborate on this a little bit more, but basically when this whole Timberwolves chaos took place, I still had the Timberwolves on my list of teams to cover, obviously, as we're doing this interview right now, and I was like, do I want to try and, like, just force it out right now, or do I want to wait? And I feel like with the way things have unfolded, even right now where things are kind of kicking back up again, this is just perfect timing regardless. So go ahead, break down this year's roster, and we're going to get into all the chaos in just a few moments.
I am excited. It's like a kid at the candy store for both of us.
Right.
Okay, so I'll start with Jimmy Butler. What can I say? 4-time All-Star, 4-time All-Defensive Team. He is a threat on both sides of the ball, and throughout the first 4 games, he's played 5 games thus far. He missed 1 game.
Mm-hmm.
And through the first 4 games, not including the other night, he really was having some crazy numbers. I think he was up to 26 points per game, 5 assists, 7 rebounds. He had a bad game recently that kind of dropped those numbers, but he was looking really, really good. He was sick last game, so again, those dropped. But, I mean, there's not much more I can say about him. I'm not going to go into personality things. I think we're going to get into that eventually. But the Karl-Anthony Towns season thus far has been pretty pitiful. And, again, that has to do with the Jimmy Butler situation. And, there's something to be noted that, 2 seasons ago, at 21 years old, Karl-Anthony Towns was averaging, 25 points per game, 12 rebounds, 3 assists, like really monstrous numbers. And now he's sitting at, 16 points a game, 8 rebounds. He's inefficient. His 2-point percentage is, 42.3. That's very poor for a big man, especially at the center position. So that's not looking too great. But the next guy would be Andrew Wiggins. Wiggins, who has played, I think, 313 out of 314 games going into this season, and now he's played 4 out of 6 games. So he's dealing with a quad injury. And I like that he's sitting out because in the past, not a lot of people know this about Andrew Wiggins, but he's harder on himself. People might disagree with this, fans who don't know Minnesota Timberwolves, but Andrew Wiggins is definitely harder on himself than the media or any analyst has been in the past. So he is stuck through injuries over the past couple of years in Minnesota. He's played every game except one, and this season he's already missed 2. So that's something to watch out for. As for his statistics, they're looking pretty Andrew Wiggins-like. I mean, nothing really jumps out at you except maybe his free throw percentage is 87.5 right now, which last year was close to 70. So that's something to look forward to this year, getting to the free throw line more often. Taj Gibson, arguably our second best player this season thus far, which is insane to say at 33 years old.
And sad.
Yeah, and very, very, very sad. He's been, Taj Gibson's one of those guys that every team in the NBA could utilize, most likely off the bench, but we're using him as a starting player, mostly because head coach Tom Thibodeau, and he also is obviously a good overall player. But he's doing very well, averaging 11 points a game, has the best shooting percentage at the rim on the team right now. I think it's top 10 in the NBA as well. So he's doing very well for 26 minutes a game. Then we have Josh Okogie, who just recently got his first minutes about 2 games ago. Ever since then, he's averaging 27 minutes a game. So obviously Tom Thibodeau likes when he gives rookies a chance now. So that's a good sign. What I can say about that player, if fans don't know Josh Okogie that well from Georgia Tech, he is a defensive threat. He's third on the team in steals in 2 games three games starting. He's already third on the team in steals, which is impressive. Only 2 steals behind Tyus Jones, who's played all 6 games. So he's a defensive threat, and he can shoot the ball pretty well from about 10 to 12 feet. Can't really shoot the 3 right now. I think that's just some practice that needs to go into the season. A lot of 20-year-olds coming into the NBA can't shoot 3 right away. But at the rim, he's very effective. He gets to the free throw line with ease. So he's a good young prospect. And a couple other guys, Gorgie Jang. Gorgie Jang is a backup center for us. He's a role player. Did not have a good season last year. He's a 29-year-old role-playing center who, if he doesn't develop a 3-point shot, will see himself out of this league. The only problem is he won't see himself out of that contract because he's in a contract for $15 million this season, $16 million the next year, and $17 million in 2021. So that's a problem going forward for Minnesota. Anthony Tolliver, who was just signed this offseason to replace Bjelica, is 33 years old, but he's a sharp-shooting 3. He's a sharp-shooting power forward, so he doesn't need to be running around the court that often. So at 33, he still has a lot to do. So that was a good, solid pickup. He averages about 20 minutes a game off the bench, so he's doing pretty well. And then I'm saving Derrick Rose for last. So, okay, the next guy will be Tyus Jones. Tyus Jones is – it's tough with Tyus Jones. Minnesota really made it an interesting move by signing Jeff Teague. So I'll talk about Tyus Jones and Jeff Teague here. 2 years ago to that contract once they got Butler, or 2 summers ago. And Jeff Teague obviously is an all-star or a former all-star, and he's a pretty good player for us now. He's well-rounded. He moves the ball full court fairly well. He does pretty much everything. There's nothing that he is, pretty average at. I would say he's above average point guard. I would say the only thing that he lacks sometimes during the season, at least I've noticed, is his perimeter defense. But Tyus Jones has lost minutes because of Jeff Teague, and that's really hurt Tyus Jones' potential moving forward. He's a 22-year-old. He's been in the NBA for a few years now, and he's only averaging 18 minutes a game when he should be averaging about 25, 27 minutes a game. So that's tough for Tyus. So there's not much I can say about Tyus Jones besides there is potential there for him to be a good role-playing point guard in this league. And lastly, Derrick Rose. I am a stan for Derrick Rose this season. I'm all in on Derrick Rose Island. As you probably could tell from me talking about Jeff Teague, I'm not completely sold on him for making $20 million a year. If he was making around 10, 11, I think that'd be fine. But $20 million, $19, $20 million, what he's making right now for playing 30 minutes a game and being at times an ineffective point guard, I don't think that he can necessarily take all those minutes this season. A move might have to be made for Jeff Teague or Tyus Jones to be sent elsewhere, because Derrick Rose has been playing at a very good level. A lot of what you've seen at him, I'll run it back from very good, a good level. A lot of what you've seen from him in New York 2 seasons ago, he's bringing to the table this year, which is a great sign. So Derrick Rose moving forward off the bench was a great contract, a great pickup this offseason for him to continue playing with Tom Thibodeau and the Wolves. I think he is an interesting player to watch moving forward with the Jimmy Butler trade, hoping to be happening soon. And it should be interesting to see if we throw Gorgie Jang or Jeff Teague in any trades fairly soon too. So that's pretty much the roster right now. Kind of like a bad news bandits situation where bad news bears, situation where once Jimmy Butler leaves, I don't really know what this team's what direction they're gonna go into. I don't know if it's just gonna be Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins' team. So I guess time will tell.
Trey, I've done 25 of these interviews so far, and that was by far and away the most in-depth and analytical that anybody's ever gone in this section. I feel like every player that I just listed, you had something to say about, and you took the time to kind of break down each player. Whereas before, I've had guests that just come on, I'll rattle off the team's roster, and they just kind of take it and they go in a different direction with it or something along those lines, but still kind of stay on course. But I mean, you just hit the nail on the head for everybody. I'm impressed. I mean, it's also your job, right? It's also your job, so I'm not that impressed, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'll say, thank you, but I'll say this. It's mostly the Minnesota Timberwolves fans that, get in my DMs or leave me comments on Twitter that keep me up at night looking at these numbers and highlights to, I'm trying to help them as they get through this hard time, just as like I'm going through a hard time right now too. So
right. Well, that was fabulous. And now with that, let's get into the roller coaster that is the past 2 months of the Minnesota Timberwolves. So let's break this down. All right, let's start in the beginning. All right. So the Minnesota Timberwolves trade for Jimmy Butler last season from Chicago. They give up a draft pick. They give up Zach LaVine and Chris Dunn, who are 2 pretty good assets at this point. And the plan is to have Jimmy Butler as a cornerstone piece of the organization for years moving forward. They hired Tom Thibodeau, and they're just like, all right, we got our core. We have Thibodeau, we have Wiggins, Karl Anthony Towns, and Jimmy Butler. Let's start to make some noise in the Western Conference. 1 year goes by, they make the playoffs, all looks good. And then suddenly, in August, correct? August?
Yeah.
Late August, thank you. In August, we hear Jimmy Butler wants out. And everyone's like, wait, what? Because nobody, that's the thing. You figured if somebody wants out, they'll try and let it be known in the summer before the draft or before free agency. That way teams can kind of move and plan accordingly. But nah, Butler's like 3 weeks before the season, he's like, nope, I want out. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't hate, but you know what I mean? I strongly dislike playing with Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. They don't work as hard as me. They don't work hard at all. Whatever, the whole 9 yards. So then, preseason, training camp, and practices go by. He is nowhere to be found. He is just away from the team. Team's going on without him. Then all of a sudden, shit hits the fan when Jimmy Butler decides to show up randomly at practice. He just goes crazy in the most passionate, emphatic way possible. He runs with the third stringers and dominates the starters, allegedly. Apparently, he's cussing out Thibodeau. He's cussing out Scott Layden, who is the president of basketball operations there. Everybody is just put on blast by Jimmy Butler. And then the next day, they cancel practice, which was just hilarious in and of itself. And then we're still here, where he has demanded a trade, they have yet to move him, and he's currently playing with the team. Go ahead, break this. I don't care where you go with this right now, Trey. Just go ahead.
Oh, man. This is a shit show. Yeah, to say the least. I've been watching the NBA for over 10 years, 15 years almost, and I think this has to be one of the craziest stories I've seen.
Wait. Did I miss anything?
I would say that you didn't miss anything. I would add to, I would preface before the summer started, Jimmy Butler, Andrew Wiggins, Karl Anthony Towns type drama was happening inside the Minnesota locker room. That was kind of whispered about in small rumors here and there. And so sort of Minnesota PR knew that there were some issues going on in the locker room there between those three, specifically Towns and Butler.
Mm-hmm.
So leading up to the summer, myself, other people involved in the Timberwolves, hemisphere, we kind of already knew that there was some maybe not liking each other here and there, that kind of stuff. So that's the only thing. You didn't miss anything. That was perfect. The best summary of a shit show you could give. But yeah, I mean, what really happens here in the future is unforeseeable in my opinion. I was just listening to Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN today on his podcast talking about possible Jimmy Butler trades in the next week or the next month, the next 2 months. And I think ultimately, if you're listening to this and you're seeing a rumor tomorrow about Jimmy Butler maybe being traded to the Spurs, just you can sleep fine that night. Okay, because most likely nothing's going to happen. So everyone is just guessing right now what's going to happen. Essentially, these Miami Heat trade proposals, these Houston Rocket trade proposals, everyone's just assuming what's going to happen. And it's not that any team doesn't want Jimmy Butler. It's just they don't want to give up what Tom Thibodeau wants for Jimmy Butler, with him being the head coach and the president. So he has a lot of decisions to make. And Scott Layden, the GM, supposedly is making the final call on this because Glenn Taylor, the owner, said he doesn't want Tom Thibodeau making this decision for whatever reason. I'm sure you can think of one. So ultimately, it's going to come down to Scott Layden and Tom Thibodeau on the side, figuring out what team they want to send Jimmy Butler to, and getting the right haul back. The problem is they want the same haul back for what they sent to Chicago. And what they sent to Chicago essentially was 3 lottery picks, right? So we have Zach LaVine, who's averaging, I think, 32 points a game right now, which isn't saying much for Chicago, but it's still something, right? Like that's let's just say Andrew Wiggins probably wouldn't be averaging 32 points a game in Chicago right now.
Right.
Chris Dunn, who was a number 5 overall pick, who Minnesota essentially gave up on after 1 year.
And whose career has just turned around entirely, pretty much.
I think he was in the running. I think he had the 4th most votes for most improved player last year.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, he is an up-and-coming player in this league. I think he's only 21 years old or 22. So, I mean, obviously that's a great backup point guard that you could have had instead of someone like Derrick Rose, even though I said all those great things about Rose. And then you have Lauri Markkanen, or Lauri Markkanen, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Markkanen, who is, people will say his ceiling is Kristaps. People are saying his floor is a great stretch 4 in the NBA, which is the future, or even a stretch 5. So you give up 3 really great assets right there for Jimmy Butler, who essentially wants to leave, and all you got from it was a 1 win in the playoffs last season, if you're a Timberwolves fan and the franchise, or anybody in the front office. So it's not a good look. As for what's going to happen in the near future, I would not expect that 4 first-round pick offer to come to fruition. I would think that something more along the lines of a pretty good role player / starter, maybe another role player, and maybe a first and another first would happen, whether it's Philadelphia, Milwaukee, maybe even Miami, like I said before, or even it could possibly be Houston. I just don't think those 4 first either were offered or Tom Thibodeau just doesn't want them because he doesn't trust them for whatever reason. If they're low 20s or whatever reason he has in his mind, I do not know. But moving forward, I would expect a couple role players and a couple first, or if not just 1 first in 2019 from a pretty good team, whether it's Brooklyn or New York or whoever. But I guess my point is it's all up in the air. I have some ideas in my mind of what should happen that I have heard whispers of, but it's really difficult to come to a conclusion on what is going to happen. And you have seen a lot of these thoughts or ideas from really important analysts around the NBA turn into so-called rumors. And I wouldn't necessarily call these rumors. I would just call them thoughts and ideas that are floating around. So I would say the average Joe next to you probably knows just as much as you do in this case, because no one really knows what Tom Thibodeau or Glenn Taylor are going to do in this situation, or Scott Layden for that matter.
You want to know what my favorite part about this whole Jimmy Butler thing is as we've begun the NBA season?
What?
The one game where Jimmy Butler didn't play versus Dallas, Karl Anthony Towns had 31 points. In every other game where Jimmy Butler has played, Karl-Anthony Towns is averaging 15. It's phenomenal.
It is so obvious that he is essentially throwing games because he emotionally cannot handle playing next to Butler. And I really feel for Karl-Anthony Towns. I know there's some people out there that are really hard on him and saying he should just make it work. But I don't agree with that in the situation. They just paid this guy, his max contract. He's saying that he's there to stay. He signed the dotted line. He wants to be there. And what do? They let a guy come and tell your can I curse on this?
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, they let Jimmy Butler come to practice, right?
Yep.
For not coming, like as you said, with not showing up to preseason practices all summer. Come to practice 2 weeks before the first game of the season, not played any preseason games, and come and play the starters 5-on-5, which the real starters, Towns, Wiggins, and who else, the other players. They probably weren't even taking it that seriously. And you have Jimmy Butler cursing out owner Glenn Taylor, telling him that he fucking needs you, which is insane. So if you're Karl-Anthony Towns, you're probably like, what is going on? I don't want to be a part of this. Like, I want this guy out. And the fact that Tom Thibodeau and Scott Layden just didn't make a deal for a pretty good player and a good draft pick says a lot about the organization. Maybe says a lot about them wanting to win now or them being scared to pull the trigger. And it's just not a good look. And, yeah, you're completely right. Towns is the only game playing without Jimmy Butler scoring 31 points and, 13 rebounds, I believe. It shows a lot because every game since then it's just been drastically worse and worse. I mean, he's averaging his worst numbers of his career. The only thing he's doing well is shooting the three fairly well. But even last game against Milwaukee, where Minnesota completely fell apart and lost by close to 30, most of the game he was standing at the perimeter waiting for Jimmy Butler to pass on the ball and then chuck up a three. It seemed like he was purposely losing the game. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say he was doing that, but it seemed like that. And if it seems like that, then I'm just a sports writer. You think a head coach like Tom Thibodeau or the owner Glenn Taylor or the GM Scott Layden would see that and be like, okay, this is our star. We need to back him. We don't need to back Butler, who told us to go fuck ourselves. We need to go into this and trade Butler.
There's two things I want to bring up. The first thing is another thing that happened during that insane practice, and that was when allegedly Jimmy Butler was guarding Karl-Anthony Towns in the post, and he told Towns, shoot it, you won't. And Towns got the ball in the post and kicked it out. What? And that's the thing, you have to remember. So, if you don't know, Jimmy Butler, if you couldn't tell by this already, Jimmy Butler is a freak on the court in terms of he wants to kick your ass and demoralize you every single time he steps out on the floor. He is as hyper competitive as they come. And Jimmy Butler, I'm looking at it now, is listed at 6'8". Karl-Anthony Towns is 6'11". He had 3 inches on him in the post where Towns has played his entire career at, and he kicked it out. My mind, when I read that tweet and that report from practice, my jaw hit the floor. That's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say is there has been a lot of talk about the draft picks that Minnesota wants to acquire in these deals. But that's the problem, is that Minnesota's worked so hard to become a playoff team where if they trade Butler and get picks in return, they're just reverting back. That's the thing. Minnesota wants to move forward, and if they trade Butler, they automatically move backward by default. And so they're almost in this no-win situation now.
Yeah, the best for the first point, for the kicking the ball out of bounds, I think Darren Wolfson of Minnesota, I think it's Twin Cities News, he reported that, or maybe it's ESPN 1500, I don't know. But he reported that, and if he reported it, he was at practice, and then I would call it factual. And if that's really what happened, I think I can just see the ball getting kicked out of bounds by Towns in this situation, and that's pretty much the Towns I just saw play Milwaukee. I mean, it looks identical. I can picture it in my mind and I see it on the screen live. So, I can totally understand if that happened. Like I said before, he just feels completely not trusted or appreciated, whatever it is, respected, maybe a better word, in this situation. As for the draft picks, like you said perfectly, it's really hard for Minnesota to look for the right way forward here. I mean, what do? They have to take a step back in order to move forward almost, because they can't. It's too late to get a Chris Middleton out of Jimmy Butler, for example. Allegedly Milwaukee denied that trade that was offered a month ago. So you essentially have to trade Jimmy Butler for hope to be good players in prospects or in assets and draft picks. And that's what they're looking, I guess, at doing, except that they also allegedly denied this Raptors trade of 4 draft picks because they didn't want to take on Brandon Knight's contract. So who knows what's going on.
You mean Rockets, I just want to clarify.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean Houston, yes.
Yeah, we're good. All right, you got anything else to cover about this? Because I think I got all my thoughts out of the way.
I guess the only thing I would say is that I hope Butler is dealt to an Eastern team. If Minnesota really wants to move forward, I would not deal him anywhere west, even though he's, I guess he's noted that he wants to go to the East regardless in New York or Brooklyn, but he could go to LA. I think trading him to a team like Philadelphia for a player like Dario Saric and like Robert Covington would make a lot of sense to round the Timberwolves out more, and they could start those players or pull them off the bench. But yeah, that's the last thing I would say about this. I just hope, not only as a writer and as a fan of Minnesota, that they get something out of this deal that isn't, just a role player and one draft pick, that you won't see that role player play for more than one season. So.
Right. Okay. Now we're at 30 minutes here, and these usually go 30 minutes, but we're just on a roll right now. I think we have time to keep going. So there's like one or two more roster moves that I want to talk about, and that's just Karl-Anthony Towns as a player and Andrew Wiggins in that same light too. So I don't know what your thoughts on Andrew Wiggins are. I don't know you, and I haven't read your work well enough to get an idea of that. I think Andrew Wiggins is the most average basketball player in the NBA. I'm pretty sure there was a study done, and he did literally, like, if you had to take the average NBA player, Andrew Wiggins, like, literally fit that mold for this case study. And we both know that Andrew Wiggins is just, he's a pretty good scorer. And, he's got the length, he has all the tools, he just hasn't been able to put it all together. There have been reports that he doesn't work hard enough, and same thing goes for Karl-Anthony Towns. And as far as Karl-Anthony Towns go, it's like, you'll look at his game log, and there's just times where he shoots 7 times a game, and you can't have that if you want your cornerstone to be a big part of your offense and a big part of your organization moving forward. So that's all I wanted to say about those two players.
Yeah, those are both great points. I guess I'll start with Andrew Wiggins. So my thoughts on Andrew Wiggins being an average basketball player, that's tough. Okay, well, I'll bring it back to 2016, 2017. He was a 21-year-old, just lost his head coach in Flip Saunders, and he played a whole 82-game season. And everyone was saying that maybe this could be the year, because the year before he averaged 20 points a game. And they said maybe this could be the year he makes an all-star team. Maybe this is the year he becomes LeBron James. I'm only saying that because that was right. The name that was thrown around when he was drafted with the whole Cleveland deal too. So it was just a lot of hype with Andrew Wiggins at this point. And as a 21-year-old, going into the loss of his head coach and going through all these expectations, and then people asking why he's so quiet, he, his numbers blew people out of the water offensively. Defensively, he had a lot to work with because I think he was still trying to figure out his frame and where he fit. But he played 82 games, averaged 37 minutes a game, 23 points a game, shot 36% from three, looked really good and efficient at the rim. He was even stealing the ball pretty well at that time. He was playing okay perimeter defense, not great interiorly. But like I said, that comes with time with your size and frame at 21 years old. So there was a lot of growth happening that season. And not a lot of people go into this, but I've written an article about it about almost a year ago that Andrew Wiggins played, I think, 41 games that season at the shooting guard position. And that makes a big difference for Wiggins, who ultimately is a 6'7", 6'8", has a wingspan of almost 7 foot. So he was automatically put at the wing. But if he's put at a shooting guard position where he can come off the pick and roll and really make a big difference from three and deep mid range, he seems to just knock down shots automatically. But oftentimes when he's put at the wing at the three, he has had to guard the hardest player on the court, and that's really made it tough for him to do better on offense and try to improve on defense as well. So I think it's really just been bad coaching that's made Andrew Wiggins really go down and decrease his potential essentially over the past 2 seasons. And not only that, but Karl-Anthony Towns' numbers kind of prove that too. I mean, he went from averaging 25 points a game to 20 points a game last season. So in the same season, Karl-Anthony Towns is averaging 25 points a game as a 20-year-old. Andrew Wiggins is averaging almost 24 points a game as a 21-year-old. So it was all looking up from the Timberwolves, and that's why that summer, following that 2017 season, they traded for Jimmy Butler because they thought that would have worked. And they got Tom Thibodeau, and they thought this is what's going to work. And it just didn't. Tom Thibodeau played the Bulls-style roster that he had in Chicago with Minnesota, and playing Karl-Anthony Towns essentially like Robin Lopez that could shoot a three is not working, and playing Wiggins at a position that he doesn't obviously feel comfortable at is not working. So I guess to answer both your questions, it seems more of like a scheme issue than it does a confidence issue. I would use Kawhi Leonard as an example. Leonard, who doesn't show any expression at any time, Andrew Wiggins does a very similar thing. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard is a top 5, top 10 basketball player, top 15 in some eyes, but I would say a top 10 basketball player when healthy, top 5. And they're not the same player, but I think Wiggins can get to the potential of shooting 22, 23 points a game a season if he's used in a correct way, and still people don't question his personality in the future if he's putting up great numbers. And the same thing goes for Karl Anthony Towns. If he's putting up 25 points a game, if he's playing Fortnite till 2 a.m. at night, then it's totally fine. So I guess it all has to do with how you utilize your players and the roster you have. And the last thing I'll say about that would be Tom Thibodeau's just done a poor job of understanding his players, their personality, the way they play. And I think that's really led to them, decreasing their potential in the future and just becoming worse.
Super well said. And before we move on, I guess I have one more question. Did you have Andrew Wiggins' stats pulled up when you were answering that first part? Because you nailed every one of the statistics correct. He averaged 23.6 points per game in 2016. You said he shot 36%. You said he shot 35 or 36% from 3. He shot 35.6. You said he was. I'm trying to think of what else. You mentioned something about steals. He averaged a steal a game. And yeah, I mean, every stat that you mentioned was almost like dead on.
I'll say this. I have the schedule up in front of me of what we're doing this season because I was trying to remember the first couple games this year because I've been crazy busy writing Jimmy Butler freaking trade scenarios.
Right.
But I've missed a lot of good game coverage. But no, I don't have the stats in front of me. I did write that Andrew Wiggins article, and I've had a lot of fans direct message me and message me below my comment below my tweets and say that Andrew Wiggins is a fraud or the worst player, worst number 1 pick ever, things like that. So I've had to do a lot of sticking up for Andrew Wiggins in a weird way because I actually don't think he's great, but fans tend to think I think he's great because oftentimes I'm sticking up for him, but that's really why I know those numbers.
All right, well, I'm impressed. Anyways, let's segue now into the fan base, fun, culture surrounding the Minnesota Timberwolves, or should I say the Timber Bulls? Da-dun. Okay, small market team, the Timberwolves, which is just such a fun meme for those who don't know. Tom Thibodeau coached the Chicago Bulls before the Timberwolves, and basically he has transformed his Bulls roster and has carried them over across states into Minnesota. Chaos, which is what we just talked about, and they seem to have finally turned it around as the organization. Soon it's probably going to go to shit, but then hopefully they find a way to get back into Western playoff contention. So just kind of plead your case for Timberwolves fans. What are some of the positives? What are some of the negatives? And kind of your experience with Timberwolves Twitter.
The positives are that people are acting like the Timberwolves are an underdog right now, which I think is a great thing. This roster beat the Denver Nuggets the last game of the season last year to get the 8th seed, and the Denver Nuggets essentially have the same roster, just older, younger players that are more experienced, which is obviously not great for the Wolves. But I do think there is a scenario where you could see Minnesota fighting for that 8th seed, even with the Lakers coming back up with obviously LeBron. And the only way I think that's possible is if good haul is traded for Jimmy Butler, players that can play right now, not future, not 4 first-round picks and Brandon Knight and Marquise Chris. But I'm talking about if it was a Dario Saric, Robert Covington type deal, you could see Minnesota making a run for it. The worst-case scenario would be in which all Wolves fans are considering at this moment to be the most likely situation, which I don't blame them, is that Jimmy Butler is traded for assets in the future and Tom Thibodeau is fired mid-season, which I don't think fans would be that angry about, but you won't see Minnesota make the playoffs for probably a few seasons. I would go that length with that. So, yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, I didn't even mention earlier, I don't mean to keep going on about it, but I didn't mention earlier that even that Bulls trade, Minnesota got Jimmy Butler, but they also got the 16th pick in the draft. I believe it was 16, and they drafted Justin Patton. And that center has not played at all for Minnesota in 2 seasons. He's injured. I think he's out for the season this year too. So it's just been a bad situation all around, and it kind of makes you sick. And not only that, but you saw Jeff Teague and the Taj Gibson signing for both of them totaling for $35 million this season alone. And so there's just a lot of bad moves that were made. So those would be the negatives. I would say that the negatives will probably overcome the positives completely this season. I would assume that Minnesota becomes the 10th seed by the end of the year. But again, there is an opportunity to become the 8th seed if right moves are made. As for Minnesota Twitter, the Minnesota Timberwolves Twitter, the fans are antsy, and they should be. They feel like they deserve an answer from Glenn Taylor, the owner. And Taylor's been, and to kind of go off of that, Taylor's been trying to sell the team for about a couple years now. Not many people know that outside of Minnesota, but they want answers from him, and I don't think he really cares to give them at this point. Not only he's trying to sell the team, but he's letting Tom Thibodeau and Scott Layden run this team into the ground. So the fans are antsy, and they want answers, and they're not getting them. And if nothing happens, I would expect pitchforks and some rioting pretty soon.
Excellently well said there. Now, I want to talk. So that's the thing. Excuse me. The outlook and the range of outcomes for this Timberwolves season is so wide. Because I think there is a world where they don't trade Jimmy Butler. I think it's possible. I'm not saying it's likely, but I think it's in the range of outcomes just because I feel like that they still want too much and they're going to hold out as long as they possibly can for that deal. And that deal might not come because other teams, it's reported that Pat Riley had a few choice words for Scott Layden and Tom Thibodeau. And so there's a chance that they might not even get the deal that they feel comfortable taking. And so this whole season could just be chaos from start to finish. However, I do think that there is also that range of outcome where they do trade Jimmy Butler, and then you're looking at a whole new dynamic for this team, which is kind of what makes this video in particular so hard to cover because you have to look at it from both sides of the coin. But, I mean, overall, I just feel like Minnesota and, like, their fans, like, that's the thing. It's been so long. We referenced it earlier, 14 years in between playoff appearances. And that does a toll on a fan base, especially in a small market like Minnesota. And so I feel like they're just kind of clinging on to any hope they can that this season somehow turns out okay.
I mean, I guess the best example would be that Minnesota is clinging on to Derrick Rose right now, and he can barely walk in the morning. So, I mean, that's a bad sign, even though I do like Derrick Rose, and as I stated before, I'm standing for him this season. But it's a bad sign that when Minnesota fans are turning to Derrick Rose to be the savior at the end of basketball games. Even if he is playing very, very well. That horrible scenario that you just laid out is definitely, I can see the world too, that Minnesota keeps Jimmy Butler. And the only way I see that happening is if Tom Thibodeau thinks that Jimmy Butler appreciates the way that he's aggressive and he wants to keep him, and for some reason that Jimmy Butler will think Tom Thibodeau is badass for wanting to keep him after the trade deadline for whatever reason. So in a world, even though it is a dumb world, I can definitely see that world happening. I mean, man, this guy came on the court, took players essentially by the throat that were the starters, throw them to the ground, having guys kick the ball out of bounds, and then telling the owner to go fuck himself, essentially. Like, it's just not looking good.
And with that, we'll wrap it up with this, Trey. You have 30 seconds to pitch anybody why they should be a fan of the Minnesota Timberwolves this season, and it's the only, possible jump I can make to wrap this up, so go ahead.
Okay, if you're looking for a team right now that's pretty much like watching Lifetime News or E-Network, this is the team to watch. There's a lot of drama going on. I feel like I've typed Jimmy Butler's name and said Jimmy Butler's name, and Jimmy Butler has ever written his own name or said his own name. So if you want to see a lot of drama and you want to read some good stuff, check me out and check us out, Dunking with Wolves, or any other Timberwolves outlet for that matter. It's a lot of drama ensuing, and each game's interesting because you can tell that people are stressed out with one another. So if you want drama, come see us in Minnesota.
Excellently well said, Trey. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Trey Flynn. You can follow him on Twitter at Trey Flynn NBA. He's a site expert for dunkingwithwolves.com, where he covers the Minnesota Timberwolves. Trey, you got anything else to plug?
No, man. Thanks so much for bringing me on. I had a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I'm sorry that I took up 45 minutes of your time doing this, but this was a blast.
Same for me, man.
Awesome. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. We've done this for almost every NBA team, and so if we haven't covered your favorite team, that'll be coming out later this week. But if we did cover your favorite team, go back and check out some of our previous episodes because they've been a blast to cover. And with that, we'll see you next time.